Yes, I'm Batman.
I'm Batman. I'm Batman, Alfred.
I'm Batman.
I am Batman.
I'm Batman.
I'm Batman.
Greetings, Bat Family. Welcome back to Holy BatCast, brought to you by Real Fans for Real Movies. Make sure you visit our website, holybatcast.com. It is your one-stop shop for all things Holy BatCast. But you can also find us all over the internet on all the other websites that you go to, or apps, or whatever. So we're on Facebook, we're on Twitter, we're on Instagram, and we're on YouTube. Just search for Holy BatCast, and you will find us. If you're a fan of the show and would like to help support the show in a more official way, other than just downloading it, you can do that on Patreon. You can go to patreon.com/holybatcast. And as always, the biggest of thank yous to our patrons. You all are wonderful, and it is very generous that you do that. So big thanks for that. We're part of the Real Fans Podcast Network, so if you're looking for other shows to check out, you can check those out at rf4rm.com. After you listen to Holy BatCast, you can peruse the other programs and enjoy them as you will. As always, I'm your host, Andy DiGenova, and if you'd like to follow me, you can do that on Twitter or on Instagram. It's just my name, Andy DiGenova, ANDYDIGENOVA. Now, this episode, we are going to be turning the clock back 10 years to celebrate the 10th anniversary of Zack Snyder's cinematic interpretation of the acclaimed graphic novel, Watchmen. And joining me for that is the Nite Owl to my Rorschach. Or maybe the Rorschach to my Nite Owl. I can't decide. I think you're more of a Rorschach. You're a little more dangerous than I am.
Well, personality-wise, it kind of fits. But
a little more crazy.
He's a little
he's
tiny
little.
dude.
That's
so.
true. He is little. You're more of a comedian, I think.
Spoiler. Thanks for making me the rapist. I appreciate that. Spoilers. Rorschach is my favorite character in this film. So.
Well, great. And that'll do it for our look back at 2009's Watchmen. Thank you for joining us.
Keep peace in the streets, everybody. We're out of here. Yeah,
please. Thank you for downloading the show. Make sure you subscribe to the show. Anyway, no, it's Jamie Drewley. Hey, Jamie.
Hey, man. What's going on?
Not much. So we are making good on this one. We teased it a couple episodes ago, and I was telling you before we started recording, but I'm going to tell all the folks out there because the last episode with me and Brendan chatting about all kinds of stuff, on that episode, I kind of hedged my bets. I was like, I don't know if you're going to hear this before Watchmen or after Watchmen, because I don't know when I'm going to release it. I don't know how I'm going to do this. And so, yeah, I made the decision to release the Brendan episode first, and now you're getting Watchmen. So if something doesn't quite line up, that's why. I mean, I did record them in order. I just thought I was going to publish this one first, and then I changed my mind. So you're listening to this one because, yeah, I'm leaving the country, and I want you to have something to listen to while I am gone. So
I think it makes sense to do it that way because in Australia, I don't think Watchmen releases until May this year. So.
That's true. That's very accurate. So I look forward to hearing Brendan's thoughts. We did miss the anniversary. I really wanted to get this out for the anniversary, but then those stinkers at New Line/WB released a new Shazam trailer, and it threw the whole timeline off, and I'm like, we're in the same month. Close enough. It's going to have to do.
Right on.
And so, this is something we have been wanting to do, and we've talked about it for, I think, years of we should look at Watchmen. It's a DC film. We've looked back at a lot of DC films, and then it got close enough that we're like, let's wait for the 10th anniversary. It seems like a good time to do it. So it has been 10 years since we saw Watchmen hit the big screen, and so without further ado, why don't we take a look back at 2009's Watchmen.
Come gather round, people, wherever you roam, and admit that the waters around you have grown, and accept it that soon you'll be drenched to the bone. If your time to you is worth saving, then you better start swimming or you'll sink like a stone, or the times they are a-changing.
All right, 10 years later, Zack Snyder's Watchmen film. We'll start, I guess, like we do with Disorder. I think like you guys do with Please Rewind. We'll turn the clock back and share our memories in 2009 of when we saw the film. And then we'll talk about how it's aged, what we like, what we don't like, and all that good stuff as we go. So going back, what do you remember about Watchmen 10 years ago?
I think my first real memory of it is seeing that trailer that had the Smashing Pumpkins song. And I never remember if it's the end is the beginning is the end, or the beginning is the end is the beginning. I never remember which version it was.
I don't know the difference.
Because one's a Batman song, one's a Watchmen song. That's how I look at it. But anyway.
I think they were both from Batman and Robin.
Were they?
Yeah. One was the first track on the soundtrack, one was the last track on the soundtrack.
Okay.
It was like a clever meta thing.
It was a trailer. I love the trailer, and my wife is a big Smashing Pumpkins fan. I never was until I got older. But I heard the song and I watched the trailer. I'm like, oh God, this is a movie from the guy that did Dawn of the Dead and 300. So I'm into this, and of course I'm fully aware that Watchmen existed, but I had never read the book prior to the movie's release. So actually, I think I went and got the graphic novel and read it a couple weeks before the movie came out, and I was like, all right, this is pretty good. So I look forward to seeing the movie, and watched the movie and absolutely loved it. I thought it was fantastic. I thought the cast was magnificent. I thought the tone and the setting and the general look and feel of the movie was superb. And I mean, I'll just get right to it. And I've said this on social media for as long as I've been on it. I fully believe the movie, and don't at me because I don't want to hear it. I think the movie's better than the book.
All right. Yeah, I think that we all remember seeing this trailer in front of Dark Knight.
Was it? Okay.
Yeah, because the movie was already shot by then, and so they used The Dark Knight to make sure that everyone going to see that movie saw the trailer for this movie.
Well, that makes perfect sense on why I saw the bloody trailer in the theater so many times.
There you have it, mystery solved. And here is my little secret. When I saw this trailer, I barely knew what Watchmen was. I knew what it was. I had heard of it. I knew that it was an acclaimed graphic novel. I remember seeing pictures of Dr. Manhattan. I didn't know his name was Dr. Manhattan. I just remember seeing pictures of a blue glowy guy. I remember seeing pictures of Rorschach, but that was all I knew about Watchmen. I knew the name of the book. I knew that it was well regarded, and I could recognize some of the characters, but I didn't even know their names. So
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, same page.
Okay, all right, good. Well, I'm outing myself, and so for those of you who are with me, with me and Jamie, don't feel bad. So
I'll take the firing squad with you on this one. Don't worry.
Okay, good. So yeah, I was like, oh wow, this looks really interesting. This looks really striking, but it didn't mean a lot to me because I'm like, I don't know what the story is.
Yeah, Zack Snyder was kind of the big selling point for me. That and the really cool trailer and the music. I mean, it wasn't the story or the name or the characters or anything else that really, got me excited for it prior to. It was all this other stuff I just mentioned.
Well, and even then, I don't think I was super invested in Zack Snyder yet. I liked 300. I thought 300 was great, but it wasn't. I wasn't following Zack Snyder's career yet either. So even though it did say from the director of 300, I went, oh yeah, I like 300, but he wasn't even on my pay attention list to the way he is now. And so I was like, it was so strange being such a big comic book nerd. I went into Watchmen pretty cold, but I liked the trailer. I thought it looked interesting. I was fascinated by it. And I remember seeing The Dark Knight with this friend who I worked with at Disney at the time, and he was like, oh my God, in Watchmen, that looks great. And then I had to play it cool. I'm like, yeah, right? I mean, how long have we been waiting for that movie, fellow nerd? And not knowing at all what I was talking about. So I knew that there was some excitement definitely from like the hardcore comic book fans who were waiting for this movie for a long time. And for me, again, I just knew the vaguest of details. Like I knew that they had tried to make it in the past. I kind of remember it being mentioned in like Entertainment Weekly or Comic Scene magazine that they wanted to make a Watchmen movie, but I didn't know what it was. So instead of like going out and reading the book before the movie, I was like, no, I'm just going to go into the movie, see what happens. And so I went and saw the movie, and I enjoyed it. But when it was over, I didn't know how to feel. And I have learned about myself historically is when a movie ends and I don't know how to feel, most of the time I end up loving the movie as I reflect on it. And that's what happened here, is I went and saw it and I was like, it's not what I expected. It was interesting, but I don't know if I liked it or not. And I just saw it the one time in the theater, but I still bought it as soon as it came out on Blu-ray, and I watched it again. And I went, yeah, I think I do like this. It's really different. It's really unique, but I like it. It's interesting. And then I watched it again. And then I was like, man, I really like this movie. This is a really cool movie. And it was one of those that every time I watched it, I liked it more and more. And it just gives you a lot to chew on. And I think, not to get ahead of ourselves, I think a lot of people walked out of the theater the same way I did, as they were like, oh, cool, big superhero movie, I'll go see it. And that was all they knew. And what they got is not what they expected. It's not what they bargained for. And so they walked out going, I don't think I liked it. And I didn't walk out saying I don't think I liked it. I just walked out like kind of mostly perplexed. But I could see how the general public who were like, oh, okay, big superhero movie. I saw this trailer before Dark Knight. And then they went and saw it and they got what they got. I could see them walking out of the theater being like, yeah, what the hell was that? I get that perspective. But it was one that for me, every viewing made me love it more. And now I truly do love it. I have some issues with it and we'll get into it. I don't think it's a perfect film, but I think it's a great film. And I think there's a lot to love about it. I think it is exceedingly ambitious, and for a movie that was in development hell for many, many years, and so many people took a crack at it and couldn't make it work, my hat's off to Zack Snyder for cracking it as well as I think he did. And I know you and I and other members of the Real Fans group, we've had this conversation probably a dozen times since we've been friends about how, yes, we do think that there were some changes to the story of Watchmen that made it better. I think there's one or two that made it worse, but we'll get into that too. But for the most part, I think they improved and streamlined on the source material. So it's a movie that I have only grown to love more the more I have seen it in the past 10 years. And it's one that I always do love revisiting, but it's also one I don't revisit as often because it's not like, oh yeah, I want something silly, I want something light for the background while I get ready for bed. You know, like Watchmen is one that I want to watch and digest and really just enjoy and get sucked into. So it was really cool to now 10 years later go back and get the chance to do that. The other thing that we should throw out there is that, like most Zack Snyder films, there are many versions of Watchmen. And so my preferred version is the director's cut, and that's what I have on Blu-ray. But I'm traveling, that's not a secret to our friends at home, and digitally, you can only get the theatrical cut, which is insanity. And then there is also the ultimate cut. So there's the theatrical cut, which is like 2 hours and 40 minutes. There's the director's cut that's like 3 hours and 10 minutes. And then there's the ultimate cut, and I don't even know how long that is. I think it's like 3 hours and 3 hours and 30 minutes, because that's the one that has the Black Freighter edited into the film. Mm-hmm. I've never watched the ultimate cut with the Black Freighter. Never once. I should.
I have the Blu-ray. I've never taken it out of the shrink wrap, to be brutally honest with you.
Like, I should watch it. I'm interested to watch it, but I don't want to buy it. And I think that's why I've never watched it. Because I was like, no, I love the director's cut. I'm not going to buy the ultimate cut, especially because in the comic, I'm not a big fan of the Black Freighter stuff. And so for me, I was glad it wasn't in the movie. And so I don't need the version that has it in the movie. I'm curious to watch it because I do want to see how it plays that way. But for me, I think the movie's better without it. That's just
it always surprises me how long the actual theatrical cut is, and I have I have the director's cut on DVD because I got this movie before I had a Blu-ray player, and then I got the ultimate cut on Blu-ray, and of course it's been available on digital off and on for several years now. Right now it's currently on Netflix, which is how I watched it the last few times I've watched it. It always surprises me to see the runtime on the theatrical version because I think to myself, man, it does not seem that long when you're watching the movie. To me, this feels like it's probably an hour and 45 to 2 hours long, and it's two and a half, minus the credits, about 2.5 hours. I mean, and for a movie to be that long, and I don't have any opposition to a movie being that long as there's a reason for it. And certainly this is a very rich film packed with details and character moments and what have you. So there's never a lull in this, at least for me. So I always find it moves at a pretty brisk pace. I mean, it's not like action packed or anything, but I mean, it's paced extremely well, in my opinion. And that just impresses me that a movie that long, to me, just never feels that long. I watched it last night right before I went to bed, and I kept thinking I'm probably only going to watch half this, and I'll get up early tomorrow and I'll watch the other half. I was through all but about the last half hour before my eyelids started getting weighted down. So, I mean, just credit to Zack and everyone involved here to make it feel that short when it's actually a longer length type of a movie.
Oh, totally. And I agree with you. Like, I looked at the digital copy I had, and I watched it on iTunes because I think even then when I bought the Blu-ray, it came with the iTunes copy, which was awesome. And I looked on iTunes, and it was 2 hours and 40 minutes. I'm like, oh, maybe it is the director's cut. And then I checked. I was like, oh, no, it's theatrical. So this is one of those cases where although I prefer the director's cut, I kind of understand why they were like, this is over 3 hours, and he got it down to 240. I kind of get that and why that happened. But yeah, I mean, the theatrical cut is jam-packed, and then the director's cut, there is even more. So yeah, if I were to have my choice, I would have gone director's cut. But because I was traveling, I was like, I'm just going to have to do theatrical. Sorry. And I was willing to rebuy it even if the director's cut was available digitally. And it wasn't. The only one you can buy is the theatrical.
Which seems really obscure to me because it seems that all the cuts have a really popular following to them. So
yeah, it's bizarre.
That's kind of baffling to me that it's like that.
So in this case, we did do the theatrical cut, but what's funny is I had a situation similar to you, Jamie, where the other night I was like, okay, gotta watch Watchmen, where Jamie and I are going to talk about this. I'm just going to watch maybe half before bed. It's not a short movie, and then I'll watch the other half the next day. And I watched the whole damn thing. I went to bed really late that night, but I was into it, and I wasn't getting tired, and I was like, well, crap, I'm moving right along, so I'll just see how long I can go. And before I knew it, Rorschach and Nite Owl were off to the Arctic, and I'm like, well, at this point, I'm in.
Yep, so, just ride it out. Another testament to how good this movie probably really is, and I kind of I glance over the IMDb page just real quickly on some of these movies that I talk about on Rewind or with you and I or what have you, and I noticed that the Metacritic score on this was only like 56, which is not particularly good. And I thought to myself, well, it's a Zack Snyder movie. It shouldn't come as any surprise to me that it wasn't, well received universally. But to me, the testament to how good this is everybody's heard me say that my wife is the destroyer of all things beautiful. I just watched this on Netflix maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago before we finalized doing this for this episode, because it was on Netflix and I could, without getting out of bed, press the play button and watch it. And my wife watched probably half the movie with me, and she never gives me any opposition to it. In fact, I was probably 40 minutes into it last night when she came up to bed, and she looked up at the screen and goes, "Are you watching Watchmen again?" I said, "Yeah, Andy and I are doing a podcast on it tomorrow." And I figured she was going to leave the room and do something else, because that's usually what she does when I'm watching something she doesn't want to watch. Mm-hmm. She laid down and watched the rest of it with me until I got to the point where I shut it off. So,
oh, nice.
When my wife's not running away from a movie, that says something.
That's always a good sign. Oh, that's cool. Yeah, and I'm not surprised by that audience score as well, because this movie, it did come out in March of 2009, and it had a really strong opening weekend. It opened at like 52, 54, something like that, like just over $50 million, which at the time for an R-rated superhero movie in March was a big deal. So it had a really strong opening, and then it didn't even double its opening weekend through the rest of the run. It crashed hard because of word of mouth. And again, I get it. For people who were like, oh, yeah, big superhero movie, I'll go check it out. I get why they walked out going, I don't get it.
I don't see the general audience appeal being very high on this one.
So I totally get it, because even as a comic book fan, I walked out and it took me some time to sort it out and unpack it and really decide how I felt about it. So yeah, this isn't like just come watch superheroes save people and it's lots of fun. It's the anti that. So huge, I think, credit, I guess, goes to Warner Brothers and Zack Snyder for them, moving forward on this. This was not a cheap movie. I think the budget was like $110 million. I'm doing this all from memory, and I could be completely off. Hold on. I'm going to check because I don't want to be giving bad information, but I want to say the budget was 110 for an
pretty impressive looking movie for 110 million, even 10 years ago.
130. So
even so, I mean, again, this is one of those movies. If you told me it was 200, I'd believe it.
Yeah, so $130 million budget for an R-rated adaptation of Watchmen, and like hyper violent, hyper depressing, if you will, like, kind of a feel bad movie. And yeah, it opened at $55 million, which again was like this was a huge opening, and then it only topped out at 107, so it didn't even double its opening weekend.
That's domestic, I assume.
Domestic.
Which I don't know. I don't know how well the appeal this thing would have had for overseas markets, but
and then worldwide, I'm sure it wasn't big in Vietnam.
No, probably not. I can see this movie being big with the UK crowd because they really seem to gravitate towards the BVS and Man of Steel and that sort of thing. At least the people from the UK that I know seem to generally appreciate that.
Lee Malaby does not speak for the entire of the United Kingdom.
I'm not just talking about him. It's him and Jim Bailey. So the two of them are
so
my
those two.
Audience.
Foreign, it did $77 million, and so worldwide it did $185 million on a $130 budget. So yeah, Warner Brothers lost a lot of money on this.
That's why there's 3 versions on disc.
Yes, and that's why they're like, well, it's for the fans. So I mean, really, it's a shame it wasn't more successful, but a lot of credit again goes to them committing that size budget to what's a pretty niche movie. And now I do believe it's a cult classic. I think that, it definitely has a lot of very ardent fans. A lot of people who like you and I, believe that it is an improvement on the book, which the book is great too. Like, don't misunderstand. You can't have the movie without the book, but I just think that they took the book, and there are a couple little things in the book that they just rejiggered and smoothed out and switched up a little bit and just made it a little better. A little tune-up under the hood, if you will. That's the other interesting point, though. That's why I'm surprised that the box office numbers were as low as they were, because you can find on any given day in any social media outlet hundreds of people that want to say all kinds of nasty things about the DCEU movies or what have you. I can't really find anybody that thinks that this movie is trash. I can certainly find people that'll put up the argument about whether or not the book is better or the movie's better. I mean, that's almost a middle split sort of a thing from what I've experienced. But I don't see there, of course, there's some, naturally. But I don't see a lot of the sentiment that this movie's garbage and it should be crucified and never watched again by human eyes. Right. No, I agree with that. I've certainly seen people who don't love it, but it didn't inspire the kind of ire that a Batman versus Superman did. And I think that is because, there's a number of reasons for that. I think the general populace just forgot about this movie. The ones who went and didn't like it, they just forgot about it. And it just didn't stay with them. And so the people who loved it are the hardcore comic book fans, those who already loved the book. And so they're the ones who continue pushing it forward. The ones who didn't like it, it's not Batman, it's not Superman, so they don't carry the grudge that they do with something like a BVS, because it's not like they're like, oh man, Rorschach shouldn't be like that, Dr. Manhattan shouldn't be like that, because if anything, it's an incredibly faithful adaptation. So that's one of the negatives I have heard from fans, which I find bizarre, is, oh, it's too faithful, and I'm like, okay,
what does that even mean?
I know, What? That's a damned if you do, damned if you don't, if I've ever heard one. Oh, you were too faithful to the beloved classic Watchmen.
If you don't like a character or two or three or whatever in the book and the way they were portrayed, and if they were portrayed that way, I guess I can see why you'd say that, but that's not the movie's fault. That's the story's fault, you know?
Right, exactly. I mean, and again, like, I think there were things in the story that I did not like that they changed for the movie, and I'm like, oh, good, because that was kind of weird. You know, for example, should I put out a spoiler warning? I guess I should put out a spoiler warning.
It's a 10-year-old movie. Most people listening to this, odds are
you're probably seen it. But anyway, we're going to just speak freely about Watchmen. You've been warned. But like a perfect example is like in the book at the very end, and I'm sorry to jump to the end, but I'm doing it before you do.
I was going to say, who do you think you are, me?
I'm trying to be Jamie Drewley. At the very end, like after like all the shit has gone down and millions are dead, Nite Owl and Spectre start having sex on the floor. I'm like, what? What the hell is this? Like, Alan Moore, you're so weird. And like, thank God that's not in the movie, because it's just a bizarre, weird, out of character action that I find baffling in the book. And thank God Zack Snyder's like, yeah, that doesn't make sense. You know, like in the face of apocalypse, you're just going to start screwing on the floor. Just little changes like that where I'm like, good, thank you.
I'm laughing because I just watched Spies Like Us last week, and that was kind of what happened in that. So I'm sorry. That's completely irrelevant.
Anyway, so there's certainly like small changes like that I really like, and then there's the one big change which I'm sure we'll get into. But yeah, I mean, I think that most people like this movie, or at least most people who like the book like the movie. I guess we'll say it that way. Because it is super faithful to the book. I mean, the book is really dense, and I think that what the movie does, I think really admirably, is how it's able to take that much material and boil it down into a more streamlined narrative. I mean, the narrative's not ABC. It's still non-linear and flashbacks and flash forwards and flash sideways, and there's definitely a lot going on in the movie. But I think that it's done in such a way that you still are following, like, you know, essentially one plot from the beginning to the end, and all of the backstory, you know, with the Minutemen and the previous generation of heroes, that's all sprinkled throughout the film, but they just don't have the time to give you the full in-depth detail of every one of those characters from whatever it was, 30 years prior to when the movie's taking place. Mm-hmm. So I think that's really masterfully done, is like, you know that there is a history to this world and you get enough of it to understand it all, but you just I just said something that Siri thought I was talking to her. I'm not talking to you, Siri. Jeez, it's not all about you. Anyway, what was my point? My point was this, is that yes, like, you get enough of that backstory that it all makes sense, but in the book, you know, there's like excerpts from the Hollis Mason book where it goes into great detail about everything that happened in the past, and you just can't do that in a movie that's still 2 hours and 41 minutes. But they smartly give you just enough of that.
Well, what the original books were, it was 12 issues, right? I'm pretty sure that's right.
I've only ever read it in one volume, so
okay.
I don't even know.
It's at least 10, but I'm pretty sure it's 12 issues. I'm almost positive about that.
That sounds right.
You figure each book is probably 32 pages, so you're talking about what, like 385 pages worth of stuff there? Mm-hmm. And there's not a lot of blank pages in this book, people. I mean, it's
and again, some of them, they're not even like comic book page. Well, number one, the comic book pages are 9 panels each, so even the comic book pages are filled with extra content. And then there are tons of interstitials that are like all prose without art.
Check out the big brain on Andy pulling out interstitials. Look at that. Oh.
All right, good night, everybody. That's where we're going to wrap up this episode.
Before it gets too far away from it, I want to make sure I bring this up, and you know, I think many of the fellow Snyder fans out there will agree with me. Zack is so masterful at these beginning sequences of giving you some flavor of what you're in store for, or in this case, some history with it, because there's so much going on in that opening credit sequence, and I think it's just incredible. I think it's truthfully, for as good as like Batman v Superman and yes, even Justice League, I think that's a great opening credit sequence to that too. I think this is his best one.
Oh, yeah, I won't argue you on that. It's terrific. And I remember reading reviews before the movie came out, and I remember one of the first things I saw was the opening credit sequence is one of the all-time greats. And then I also saw other comments like, if you're going for like a superhero action adventure, you're going to be disappointed. So I remember even reviews kind of trying to warn people that it's not what you think it is. But yeah, the opening credit sequence is masterful. It's terrific. It's beautifully shot, beautifully edited. And you're right, so much storytelling in that opening credits. And what I love about it is that like the first time you see it, you're watching it and you don't know who these characters are, but you're seeing these almost, like slow motion snapshots of different moments in the lives of these characters. And then later on in the film, like when you see it in the opening credits, you don't have context for it, but you recognize it and you go, oh, okay, that random guy with wings got drug off in a straitjacket. Interesting. All right. Oh, look, that, Carla Gugino's pregnant. Okay, cool. Like, and like you make a mental note, but you don't know what any of it means. And then as the movie progresses, they're brought back up. It's referred to, and you go, oh, I saw that in the opening credits. Mm-hmm. And so it's really well done, and it all makes sense. Like, and I was really impressed with that because it could be that you would have forgotten, but for some reason, all of those little vignettes in the opening credits, they're all interesting enough that they stick out to you. So when they are referenced later, you connect the dots yourself.
Right. And, this isn't a movie that's really easy to, and I generally hate it when people say this to me. So, I mean, hypocrisy at its finest, I guess. It's a movie that's really hard to absorb everything just watching it once or even twice. I'd say even 3 or 4 times is maybe what it takes on some of this. That I've seen the movie probably 15 or 20 times in 10 years. And every time I watch it, including the credit sequence and throughout the film, there's always things that I catch that I never noticed before. Mm-hmm. And well, I always appreciate that because, I mean, how textured and layered must a movie be for that to happen? Because there's movies that I've seen dozens of times that I have every single frame committed to memory kind of movies, and nothing ever surprises me with it. And it's not to say I don't enjoy the movie. I'm certainly still entertained by it or what have you, or I wouldn't have watched it that many times. But in cases like this, to me, it just seems rare that you watch it that many times and there's still something fresh or different that you just didn't catch before. And that just impresses the hell out of me.
No, I think that's totally accurate. And it's super dense, the same way the book is. The book is just packed with stuff. And just like the book, the movie, yeah, you get a little something new every time. I mean, and yeah, I didn't dislike it the first time I saw it, but I only liked it more the more I watched it because, yeah, the more you watch it, the more the pieces come together. So, no, I get what you're saying is yeah, sometimes it feels like a little bit of a cop-out. Is, you got to see a movie 5 times and then you'll like it. I get that. I think you could still like this on the first try, but I think that it definitely rewards multiple viewings.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Especially with that backstory kind of stuff, those little details, those really more start to rise to the surface the more you watch it.
Yeah, I fully agree with that.
But yeah, so I mean, I agree with you on the opening credit sequence. It's terrific. It's just so good. This was one of Jackie Earle Haley. I mean, we can talk a little bit just about the cast and the characters. So Jackie Earle Haley is Rorschach. Billy Crudup is Dr. Manhattan. Malin Ackerman is Silk Spectre 2 Jr. Jeffrey Dean Morgan is the comedian. Patrick Wilson is Nite Owl 2. Carla Gugino, one of Zack Snyder's favorites. She is the original Silk Spectre. So a really fantastic cast of a lot of great actors. Not the most expensive actors. Matthew Good is Ozymandias. I always have a hard time with this.
Adrian Veidt.
Yes, Adrian Veidt. Ozymandias. Yes?
Sure.
Ozymandias. It was one where I should say out loud, I saw the movie cold. I didn't know the story before going to see the movie. And that, again, was intentional because it certainly crossed my mind, oh, I should go back and read the book. But I'm like, no, you know what? I kind of want to just see the movie on its own terms. So when some of the fans had some issue with some of the changes about the movie versus the book, for me, that was completely lost on me. And then eventually, yes, I did read the book. I've read the book a couple of times since then. So now I do know a little bit more about those differences. But even reading the book, like Ozymandias, oh man, it's a mouthful. But yeah, so overall, a really great cast, and good actors, but like, again, not super expensive actors. But I also do remember like the announcement that Jackie Earle Haley was going to play Rorschach. And to me, it meant nothing at the time, but he had just kind of had a little bit of a comeback, and this was like his big budget comeback right after that. And so much of the movie rests on him and him really selling that Alan Moore internal dialogue. And we've talked about in the past, sometimes that internal dialogue can be great and sometimes it can be frustrating or annoying, but I think that I really like Rorschach's. It immediately sets the mood. It's so descriptive. It's often insightful and interesting, and it gives you stuff to think about. And so yeah, like Rorschach is really the one who takes us through this, and then through his investigation we meet everybody else.
Yeah, I definitely think Snyder and the writers, whoever, they wanted you to be. I mean, he's kind of an asshole. I mean, let's just be real about it. He's an asshole. He's an asshole. He's a bigot. He's got problems. I mean,
one of my favorite parts of the whole movie, because I love Nite Owl. Shouldn't surprise you. He's he's the nice guy, so I like Nite Owl. But when Nite Owl finally, like, 2/3 of the way through the movie, calls out Rorschach, and he's like, what the hell, Rorschach? Like, you ask for people's help while insulting them, and everybody lets it slide because they just assume you're a lunatic. And I was like, thank you. Yes. Call him out on his BS. It was awesome.
But see, I can relate to, other than the bigoted portion of it, I really kind of relate to him, so I get it. But
everybody puts up with you because they just assume you're a lunatic.
Clearly, that is the case.
They're not wrong.
But look, I gotta thank this guy for putting the term human bean juice into my vernacular, because that makes me laugh every time. But I think they want you along the ride with him because, I mean, ultimately at the end, again, we're jumping all over the place here, but ultimately at the end, isn't he really the hero of this particular version of the story?
You could say anti-hero, but he's certainly the protagonist.
You follow what I'm saying? I mean,
yeah.
It never compromised, even in the face of Armageddon. I mean, he's going to tell the world what they've done, right? And
right.
His journal gets away to this conspiracy news outlet or whatever. I mean, just every time it gets to the end and they show that journal and Rorschach's journal, October 1985, whatever, and I always just smile a little bit because I know he got the best of them in the end. Mm-hmm. And I think that was certainly deliberate, and that's really why I think he is the one that you get. I don't necessarily want to say the most perspective, but I think the most detailed perspective is his for that reason.
Well,
that's my interpretation anyway.
No, I think that makes sense. And I think Jackie Earle Haley is great.
Oh, he's so good.
He's so terrific. He really makes the part his own, and I can't imagine anyone else doing it. And it's funny because you see him throughout the film, like usually he's got the mask on, but then when he's in the background or he just kind of walks in the foreground carrying the sign, and a lot of times Zack Snyder doesn't even call attention to it, so you could miss it, which I love, that he's always just kind of there.
The book is very much the same way on that matter, though.
Yeah, so I do love that. But once I went to the book, I was like, oh my God. And he even looks exactly like Dave Gibbons drew Rorschach.
Yeah, pretty much.
Like it's right off the page. So
that truthfully is my one regret about having read the book just before the movie came out, was not getting that surprise as it was revealed in the theater there.
That it was him?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so we talked about the opening credit sequence. Prior to that, we get the death of the comedian. And you know who killed the comedian? Richard Citrone.
Really?
Yeah.
I did not know that.
He killed the comedian. I'm pretty
He's
sure
everywhere. My God, he's everywhere.
Well, anywhere Zack Snyder is.
True.
I mean,
I watched Ghost of Mars about 2 or 3 weeks ago, and I was like, hey,
Nice.
I know this guy.
He does other stuff too, but yeah, I swear he said that on when he came on Holy BatCast. Is he said that he's the one who kills the comedian. But like, man, even that sequence is just brutal. The fight between him and the comedian. To his credit, he goes down swinging. He's not going down without a fight, but oh man, that is a brutal way to open the movie, and like really awesome and really violent and really scary.
Absolutely. And I watched this a couple weeks back, and I'd sent out a tweet that I can't hear Nat King Cole's Unforgettable without thinking about the comedian being beaten like a stepchild.
Yeah.
And I got a huge response on that from my Twitter account. I was actually surprised that many people responded to it. I mean, it was higher than most of my stuff. But anyway, I mean, the soundtrack is another thing I want to commend to this, is because, I mean, I like Nat King Cole. I don't have anything against him. I listen to his Christmas album every year, multiple times. I just, there's so much of this music that's in here that is not stuff that I generally listen to, but now I'm like such a fan of the soundtrack because I associate so much of the music with the movie. Mm-hmm. And I actually listen to the soundtrack pretty regularly, but the usage of the soundtrack here is excellent. I mean, it's absolutely excellent. But this sequence, certainly no exception to that as far as the soundtrack and the choreography. And it's kind of a jaw-dropping moment because, you know, you see this guy. I guess you don't really know him at this point, but I mean, you see him certainly attempting to put up some resistance, and anything he does is just met with more punishment. Essentially. Mm-hmm. So yeah. I mean, you're right. It's brutal. It's pretty relentless, and obviously ends very badly for him. So.
Right. But it's awesome, you know, like.
Oh, it certainly is. Yeah.
It grabs you when you start. It's terrific. So. You mentioned the soundtrack. It's funny, like, the soundtrack is great, and most of the songs are taken directly from the book. Because one of the complaints I had when the movie first came out was, jump to the end again, when Rorschach and Nite Owl go off to the Arctic to confront Ozymandias, the song that they play, it's like Jimi Hendrix, maybe?
Yeah, it's like All Along the Watchtower or something like that, maybe?
And, like, when I saw the movie, I was like, man, like, what a weird choice for a song in this moment. Like, I feel like this moment should be like this big rousing theme because they're off to go stop the bad guy. Like, this should be like a big moment, and they're playing this song instead. And I found it weird. And
you know what your problem is here? You can't hear Jimmy.
Oh, okay. That sounds right.
Is that a reference lost on you? Or?
I've heard that reference, but I don't remember where it's from.
It's White Men Can't Jump. But anyway.
Oh, okay. And so I remember saying that we were having this discussion with some fellow comic nerds, and I was like, yeah, I just don't like that song that they play when they go off. And a bigger, a more educated comic book fan than I was like, well, that song is in the book, and that's why it's in that part. And I was like, oh, well, there you go. That explains it. And now, again, like now I've kind of warmed up to it, and I'm like, oh, I kind of dig it now. But that was something I just remembered the first time I saw it. I was like, oh, what a weird choice of song in this moment. And they're like, yeah, that was written into the book. I was like, oh, well, there you go. Going back to the death of the comedian, the sequence is terrific. But here is something I want. I mean, and this goes to one of my complaints of the film. One of my big complaints of the film is that we open with the death of the comedian, and it's terrific. But the movie is essentially a murder mystery. And that's the through line that takes us through and allows us to learn about all these different characters and the state of the world and what it means to be a superhero in this world and what's going on with America and Russia. But the main thread is a murder mystery. Mm-hmm. In that opening scene, you can see Adrian's face.
You're paying much closer attention than I am.
Well, you can. And then here's my biggest problem with the whole movie. The whole movie. I love Matthew Good. I think he's handsome. I think he's talented. I like him. He plays Ozymandias like a villain from frame one. And there's never any doubt. And I went in fresh, and I was like, oh, that's the bad guy. because he plays him evil from the moment you meet him. And I'm like, God, what a terrible choice. And then when I read the book, I was like, oh, he completely missed the point. So that, I think, is the biggest misstep in the movie, is the portrayal of Ozymandias. Ozymandias is supposed to be the most loved human being on the planet. He's Tom Hanks. Everybody loves him. But the way Matthew Good plays it, like, Matthew Good should be playing him like Superman, but Matthew Good plays him like Lex Luthor.
Okay.
And so the mystery is completely lost in the movie. You know he's the bad guy from the very beginning. Even if you don't see his face in the opening, you meet him and you're like, okay, this guy, there's something going on with this dude. He's not a good dude.
I'd read the book, so none of it was a surprise to me. Like, instantly, I knew before the movie even started who did it. So I wonder if that's one of those perspective things that makes a difference on whether or not you went in cold or had read the book previously.
Well, again, I went in cold and I still called it from the moment we met him. And then I was like, huh, that's weird. Like, that wasn't hard to figure out. Weird. And then when I read the book, I was like, oh, well, no wonder, because in the book, he's the nicest guy in the world. Everybody loves him. And so that's why it's so weird that he does what he does, because in the book, he is the one you would least suspect. But in the movie, he's so cold and calculating the whole time that you go, who else is it going to be?
This may be me trying to make excuses or whatever, but I wonder if that choice maybe wasn't because they figured most people that had seen the movie would read the book first. Maybe, I don't know.
No, I just think it's a pretty fatal misstep.
Okay.
If you're going to make it, and the other thing is, and I've even thought that, I'm like, well, maybe they weren't even trying to make it a mystery. But if that were the case, then you wouldn't have the red herring moment where someone tries to quote unquote assassinate Ozymandias.
Well, see, that would, to me, again, if I had not read the book, that moment would have been the dead giveaway to me because of the whole, he's got a poison capsule. I was like, how the hell would you even see this poison capsule and know that he was, doing what he's doing?
Yeah.
That's, to me, that would have been the moment that made it very obvious.
Well, and the whole point of that scene is to throw you off the scent. The whole point of that scene is the red herring to go, oh, I guess it's not him. When obviously it is. So yeah, like, that's the part that drives me nuts is I'm like, imagine if Matthew Good played Ozymandias the way he's played in the book all the way up until the end. And then in the end, he makes the turn. And then you go, oh man, I loved that guy. And now I kind of hate that guy. But in this one, he always seems like a dick. So that's my biggest bugaboo about the Watchmen movie. I love almost everything else. Like every other interpretation of the character is spot on. Rorschach is spot on. I love Dr. Manhattan. We're gonna get to that. Nite Owl is terrific. Like, I just don't know how they missed the mark on Ozzy. It's so weird.
See, I really enjoyed the performance. I enjoyed the character. I enjoyed how it was written. I mean, I've never really looked at it from the perspective that you're talking about because, again, nothing really seemed like it was too obvious to me because, I mean, at that point I'd known. Again, I almost wish now I hadn't read the book before I saw the movie to see if you and I were agreeing on that point versus me just kind of shrugging it off going, oh, okay.
Well, anyway, I made my point. That's my big issue, but there's so much else to love about the movie. So I just wanted to get that out of the way, and I got it out of the way early. But yeah, I didn't really notice that you could see his face in the opening until this viewing, so you do have to look for it. But, like the best murder mysteries, you shouldn't even know the gender, but like it's very obvious, like, oh, it's a man, he's pretty skinny. Like, and again, they didn't do a great job of trying to hide his identity. He destroys the comedian. And so, yeah, and then, you start meeting the rest of the Watchmen. And it was funny, like, as I was watching this, I mean, there's so many, I mean, we know Zack Snyder came from the world of music videos. And for me, that's a huge plus because there are sequences in the film that are very much like music videos. And I mean that as a compliment, not as a bad thing. So, like, one of the parts that I just marvel, I mean, there are a lot of sequences in this where I go, oh my God, that was just an amazing sequence and I want to applaud. And then there's another one and then I want to applaud again. But one of the ones that I just really love is the funeral of the comedian.
That's so good.
And like, so it's to The Sound of Silence, which I think is really awesome. But then how it like checks in with Dr. Manhattan, and then you flash back to a time where the comedian and Dr. Manhattan were working together, and then it goes to Nite Owl, and then you flash back to when Nite Owl and the comedian were together, and you do that with all the different characters. So it's all taking place during the funeral, and like I think the funeral lasts about 15 minutes, because during that funeral you keep flashing back to different parts of the comedian's life as he interacted with the different members of Watchmen. And it's just so wonderfully edited, wonderfully shot, so much good information, so entertaining. Like, the performances are there, and I just am like, man, like, this was just masterful the way it was put together.
I'll co-sign that 100%.
Yeah, so that's one of my favorite sequences. But my all-time favorite sequence in the whole movie, and I would watch it on repeat, is the Dr. Manhattan origin sequence.
Oh, everything about that. The music, the narration to it, the eeriness of it. You know, the such and such time on such and such day. Oh God, what's the word he uses? Like, it's not cardiovascular system.
Yeah, circulatory system.
Circulatory system shows up here, and then, you know, the next time it's like, you know, the musculoskeletal structure shows up here, and then, you know, the cafeteria scene where it's like the fully realized version. I mean, just that whole thing. You know, even given the history of, you know, his date with Jenny and the watch, and, you know, fixing the watch with his father. I mean, just all of that stuff is really extremely well done. I think it's just fantastic. I don't know that I would call that my favorite sequence, but it's certainly a standout for me.
Yeah, for me, it's my favorite sequence in the movie, and it's one of my favorite just sequences in movies. It's just amazing. The narration is amazing. The performance by Billy Crudup is amazing. I love his performance as Dr. Manhattan. It's and brilliant. I remember hearing a little complaints back in 2009 that like he was too soft spoken or something. Like he should have been a little more like big, powerful, and booming or something. And I was like, no, it's perfect. Like, the absolute indifference that he has is perfection. And Billy Crudup's voice, just with very little emotion, you know, almost like a Mr. Freeze type thing. With
I was just thinking that very same thing.
Yeah, like the less emotion, the better. And so the way, how matter-of-factly he tells you the story of how he came to be, and it's very clinical, and it's very like, she frames the snapshot. It's the only photo that anyone has of me. You know, like, oh, like it gives you chills. And the way it's edited, the way it's shot, you're right, the music in the sequence is my favorite. It's amazing. And the whole thing has this very cool, trippy, dreamlike quality, and it all works amazingly. So even in the theater in 2009, when I didn't know what the heck I had gotten myself into, when that sequence ended, I was like, holy shit, that was amazing.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
And the way it ends, when he says, I'm tired of Earth. I'm tired of I'm tired of Earth, these people. I'm tired of being caught in the tangle of their lives. Okay, number one of the best quotes ever, and that goes to Alan Moore. He wrote it. But it's right there in the movie. And it is a quote that has only resonated with me more the older I've gotten.
I've seen that meme or GIF or whatever so many times. Just in the last 2 years. It's crazy. It's
so real. But oh my god, yeah. So I had to give special love to the Dr. Manhattan sequence because it's masterful.
Well, you know, me being the sick bastard I am, I think my favorite, and I don't think that it's necessarily the quote-unquote best sequence in the film. I mean, I'd probably have to sit down and really think about what I'd consider for that. But, I mean, that one, the one you mentioned there, is certainly on the table for that, unquestionably. But my favorite is, like, Rorschach in prison.
Ah, okay.
Just because of the utter damage that he does to these people when he's in there. And it's got the little person who's I never remember the actor's name. He played Mickey on Seinfeld, which is
Right.
where I became a fan of his, and I thought he was great there. And I think he's great in this. And the dickering around they're trying to do with him, and the stuff he does to him, like the cafeteria line sequence where he's, you don't understand. I'm not trapped in here with you. You're trapped in here with me. And I'm like, yes. That's the kind of thing that appeals to me because it's that.
Oh man, when he puts that scalding oil on that guy, that still makes me cringe.
Oh.
That is
I think
brutal.
that's part of my appreciation for that character is he almost feels Punisher-esque in the fact that he has like zero qualm about doing anything like that to anyone that he considers evil or wrong or anything. I mean, just like the sequence where Silk Spectre and Nite Owl are at dinner and they're talking about the one villain. And I'm sorry, I can't remember the name of this particular villain, but he wasn't even really a villain. He just dressed up and acted like a supervillain because he got off on people beating him up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And she's like, oh yeah, I remember him. Whatever happened to that guy? Oh, he tried that shit on Rorschach and he threw him down an elevator shaft.
Right.
That's,
oh yeah.
Oh god, I mean, Rorschach is the furthest thing from a perfect human being you'd ever see in your life. But for some reason, I just really get a huge kick out of him for the most part.
Well, I mean, some of the best characters are not always the most heroic characters, and Rorschach is incredibly entertaining and fun to watch, and fascinating. And you're right, like, oh man, like but that's who he is, no compromise. Like for him, things are black and white, and so he has no problem screwing these people up or just making sure they don't come back.
Right. And his interaction with the other characters, especially Nite Owl, I think him and oh god, don't go blank on his name. Oh shit. I want to call him Orm, and I know that's not his name because Patrick Wilson. Patrick Wilson. Yes. Okay, I'm not a complete idiot today, just a stumbling idiot. Those two play really well off of each other, and they have the little sequence. Rorschach's broken into his house. He's eating the beans, and they kind of have that little reminiscent thing down there. He's like, and they cap it off by going back and forth a little bit. They cap it off by Nite Owl yelling at him. He's like, hey, whatever happened to us? And Rorschach just yells back at him, you quit. Because, he's right along, but, doing his thing. He didn't give a damn about the law. He's going to serve up justice any which way he can, which is kind of a Batman, kind of a Punisher. He's just doing it his way.
Yeah.
But
true. He shows up at Dan's place and then he starts insulting Dan.
Yeah, but you're right. He gets called on his crap eventually for it. But Dan is not only the one who puts him in his place, but he's also kind of the defender of him. It's like he has a better relationship and or understanding with him than any of the others did because having worked with him as however long they did. So he kind of sticks up for him too. It feels like.
Oh no, it is. Yeah, it's like he's the one who he's very sympathetic to Rorschach, then eventually he gets pushed a little far. But there is that great moment where you really understand why Rorschach is the way he is. And I'm not talking about like his childhood, which is its own thing, but when they do the flashback of him finding that child murderer.
Yep. And the dogs.
Yeah, with the dogs are, chewing on the bones of her leg. So another moment where it's like, oh, people who thought they were coming for just a fun little superhero movie, I'm so sorry you bought a ticket for this one. And he I know this was the circumstances around how he killed the bad guy changed from the book, but that the end result is the same. But when he says something I'm paraphrasing, but he's like, fate didn't kill that little girl. Destiny didn't feed it to the dogs. It was a person. And that was when he realized, no, we're the problem. People are the problem. And the ones who are the problem, I'm not going to let them keep being it. And so, them showing that is really a turning point in his life where he went from, he used to serve him up to the cops. And then he was like, you know what? No mercy anymore.
Yep. I mean, he became a changed man, and I think they did a good job of showing why and giving that background to it. Even if you don't necessarily agree with the methods or his personality or anything else, I think it was conveyed extremely well in how it was presented.
Right.
The two things with him, and I always appreciate, my main thing with movies is always entertainment value first. I mean, we know that, but not far behind that is strong character work, and I think this movie has that just coming out of tears. Mm-hmm. And in his case, the quirky thing about him in that he barely speaks in complete sentences because he's just blunt and to the point, and it's almost like a complete sentence takes up too much of his time to say, so he says it. And he's intelligent. He's got a vocabulary. He just chooses to speak that way for whatever reason it may be. And that's my take is he's just blunt to the point and doesn't have time to have a typical conversation with somebody.
Right.
He's just right to the point.
Well,
like
yeah,
even when he's at the base and he's trying to tell Manhattan that somebody's killing capes or masks or whatever the term is. That I think mask is the term that was used. But John tells him, it's time for you to go, and he's like, I'm not leaving until I've had my. And he zaps him outside, and then he's, in the middle of his sentence out there. I mean, that's
awesome.
But the other thing I really love about him, and I think Nite Owl and Spectre and some of the others as well. I think this is certainly applicable to, but. He really stands out for me because I think they show it more with him is the way he moves.
Yeah.
Like when he gets to that army base and he kind of does that little almost parkour-like thing where he runs up that tower real quick. Or when he first gets to the comedian's apartment building and he comes up with that grappling hook and shoots it up and then, just kind of lands on the windowsill.
That's one of my favorite shots. That's so good.
It's fantastic. But, I mean, just his movement throughout, like he gets set up with the Moloch thing and he's running from the cops, like his movements through there. And then, even when you get to the end with the showdown with Vite, I think his movements are really great there. And again, I think some of the others have this too. I just think he gets more of it than anybody else.
No, absolutely. I agree. And that's just it is like, I wouldn't call him a hero because he's screwed up and he is crazy and he does some not heroic things, but that doesn't mean he's not an interesting character. And so I think that, he is fascinating to watch and follow through the movie. And you get a more traditional hero in Nite Owl, a reluctant hero. And I've always been impressed, like, by Patrick Wilson, how nerdy he lets himself be. And, like a little, he's not quite as like chubby as he was in the book, but still a little, not in the best shape, and that's the whole point, right? It's the an ex superhero who, now that he's not a superhero, kind of let himself go.
And Rorschach even calls him on that at one point too. So.
Yeah. But I will say, like, as soon as he gets in the suit, he looks amazing. So I guess that suit hides all kinds of sins. But
that is such a fantastic suit. It's glorious. And then even the costume change at the end when they get to the Arctic, I thought. That's even cool looking there. I mean, it's as simple as it is, just kind of having the white, like Arctic owl, snow owl, whatever stuff going on over the top of that. I thought was just really cool looking.
Oh, it is. And I love that it's set up earlier in the film. So that way when he's wearing it, you go, oh, yeah, okay, cool. Because it's right there in the case next to the main suit. And so the couple of times before that they check on it, you go, oh, yeah, like, what's that? The cold weather costume? And then when he wears it later, you go, oh, yeah, I remember seeing that. So... no, and I think the costumes and the looks of the characters overall are all perfect. They're all great. So yeah, I think, this was Michael Wilkinson, who of course went on to do Man of Steel and Batman vs. Superman with Zack Snyder. So this was them jumping into the world of superheroes. And so this gave us our first glimpse at what a Zack Snyder superhero world would look like.
I actually kind of remember, and this is a silly thing I shouldn't even bring up, but I'm just going to touch on it briefly and then move on. I actually remember when the tech suit or whatever it's called from Justice League, when pictures of that surfaced, and people were like, ugh, it looks like Nite Owl.
Yeah.
Nite Owl is basically Batman, so why wouldn't it look like Nite Owl?
Yeah, just because it has goggles? Great. Yeah, I remember that too. But yeah, so I mean, I think they all look great. Sally Jupiter, Carla Gugino, I love her look, especially in the past. the classic Silk Spectre look, and then she has some really great moments. It's a smaller part, but I love her moments in the present where she's older and nostalgic for the past, for the good and the bad, and she has that great line about, you know, like, oh, you're young, you don't understand. Once you get older, the future looks darker and the past looks brighter, even the bad parts.
Yes, that's brilliant, because she's embracing all of that. I mean, she's got the little Tijuana Bible thing that she's so enamored about, and her daughter is just like, oh, this is gross, and she's like, oh no, it's flattering. And it's like, if you know, you can totally see that if she would have saw that when she was in her mid-20s, she'd have been completely repulsed by it. But now that she's 67, she looks at that and thinks, oh, somebody thought enough of me to do this, you know? And
yeah.
It's perfect. It lines up perfectly with that line that she says about, you know, even the grimier parts being brighter or whatnot.
Right. Yeah, I love it. It's such a harshly, you know, just another kind of hard-hitting moment right there, and I think she's really great in it. The
parallel that I want to draw here, and this is me just being weird because this is stuff that I notice and it appeals to me. Carla Gugino has a Hall of Fame smile. Malin Ackerman also has a really great smile, so I love the fact that, you know, they're playing mother-daughter, and they both have just that killer smile. I don't know if that's purely coincidence, or if, you know, the casting or Zach or whoever saw that and they're like, yep, this is going to work. This is why we're going to cast her to play her daughter. But I think it's great because I'm weak in the knees for a great smile, and they both have it. So,
all right. I can't say I noticed, but I noticed that they had nice smiles, but I never related them to each other. I mean, I always buy them as mother and daughter. I was going to say, like, another one of my small nitpicks, and it's a small one, so I'll just mention it and move on, is the old age makeup is pretty rough in this movie.
Yeah, it probably could have been better.
It's not great. And Nixon's the worst. Nixon looks like a Halloween mask. Oh, I have a hard time whenever he's on. I almost never hear what he's saying because I'm like, what are you wearing? So that's another thing that's just another like smaller nitpick where I was like, oh man, I wish that would have gone back for another pass. But anyway,
it's not enough to really take away.
It's not a deal breaker, but
I completely notice it. It's just not enough that makes me go, piss on this, you know?
Yeah, exactly. It's not a deal breaker, but it's just one of the things like where I was like, oh man, I wish they could have fixed that. So, we mentioned Malin Ackerman. I feel like Malin Ackerman often gets a bum rap in this movie. I've heard that from fans as well, but I think she does well. I mean, she's not amazing, but I think that for what she does, I think she's good in the part. I like her.
She's serviceable here, and I don't mean to disrespect or say mean things about Malin Ackerman because I like her. I really do. I know we had this brief discussion about Rampage and how she was chewing scenery and she wasn't nearly.
I think she's better. She's better here than she is in Rampage.
Well, I'm getting there. But I even liked her in that because I like her. I mean, she's beautiful. I think she's a competent actress. I think she's fine. I mean, I don't have any real big issues with her. But if there is a weak link in the performances in this film, she has a little bit more than anyone else that stands out to me. And I do think this is actually the best performance of her career that I've seen.
I would agree with that.
A ton of stuff, but
yeah. This is probably the best she's been.
Right. But in the case where she feels like she's maybe stumbled a little bit, or I thought maybe they should have taken a different take, it's small moment stuff. When she gets to her big moment stuff, especially when she's on Mars with Dr. Manhattan, I think she's on point, and I have no complaints there whatsoever. When she's in those big moment things, or even when she's laying into him about the working while they're in bed together and the multiple, not clones, but like beings of him. Like even in that moment when she's laying into him, I think she's delivering really strong there. So again, I think when it matters most, I think she steps up and really does it very well.
Yeah, no, I think she does a good job, just not quite a great job, but yeah, I think this is the best that I've ever seen of her. And I think there's probably a reason, like, you get a big part in a movie like this and then she's never quite been in anything this big again. It's because she has a range, and I feel like she kind of hit it here, but
I think she sells her fight sequences very well too. So credit to her and the coordinators for that both.
Yeah. I mean, she certainly looks great in the fights. Like, the trailers love that shot of her with the fire.
Coming down through the ceiling?
Yeah, well, there's that, and then there's where, like, there's the explosion, and she kind of turns her head in slow-mo.
But the scene in the alleyway and the scene where they go to jailbreak Rorschach, I think both of those are fantastic fight sequences.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And, yeah, I mean, there are certainly action beats throughout the film, but, yeah, like, again, those who were looking for the Avengers, it's not this.
That's not what this is.
It's not what this is. But yeah, I think that the prison break with Nite Owl and Silk Spectre is really awesome. And there's the moment where she like jumps out of Archie and lands on the roof, and then we follow Archie and it comes back around, and then Nite Owl jumps out and like glides down. That's just one of my favorite shots in the whole movie. And again, it made me go, oh, Zack already wanted to do something with Batman, because that shot of Nite Owl coming down out of Archie, I was like, he wants to be Batman. I got it.
Zero problems here.
Oh, no, without a doubt. So, yeah. But even like you mentioned that alley fight is brutal.
Oh,
my
it's
God.
nasty. It's straight nasty. There's so many broken limbs and
bones cracking and blood spraying, and
that first catch that he does when he gets that dude's arm and he throws the punch into the elbow joint and just shatters it to oblivion. You talk about something that makes me cringe every time I watch it. That's it.
I do love like when the gang sort of follows them into the alley, and they all sort of look at each other like, easy money. And just that moment between Dan and Lori where they're like, oh man, you guys just picked the two wrong people.
they do seem a little bit happy about that.
Well, I mean, that's the whole point, right? Dan is literally impotent, which is a big part of his character, is like, without being Nite Owl, he has like lost his manhood. I mean, that's the metaphor that Alan Moore was going for. And so it's not until he becomes Nite Owl again that he is himself again. So yeah, like getting that little moment, it let them feel alive again, because, you know, they weren't living up to who they should be or who they used to be in their current civilian lives.
Great sequence.
So, yeah, it's good stuff. We talked a little bit about Dr. Manhattan. I think he's awesome. I think Billy Crudup is amazing. I also remember distinctly when the movie came out, people were like, I hope you like Blue Dong. Like, that was a big thing.
There's no shortage of it.
There's certainly not. One thing I've always appreciated about Zack Snyder as a filmmaker is he appreciates the beauty of the human body, both male and female. And I've always liked that about Zack. No, he equally appreciates both sides. I think it's great. So, and it was like there was one guy who was Dr. Manhattan's body, I think, and then Billy Crudup just did the head, the face, or maybe the body was all CG, and then Billy Crudup did like mocap.
I really don't know, to be honest with you.
I've definitely seen Billy Crudup in the mocap suit doing Dr. Manhattan, but I can't remember if they had a body double for Dr. Manhattan's body. But all I will say is, however they did it, 10 years later, it still looks amazing.
I fully agree.
Like, he looks so good. He looks perfect. And I also love that moment, like, later on, so subtle, like when he's going to go on TV right before the Janie Slater moment, and then we get the whole backstory. But when they go, oh, he's too bright, this is not going to work on TV, and how he dulls himself, and he goes, is that better? Mm-hmm. Oh, it's just like, it's just what a cool freaking moment. But yeah, I love Dr. Manhattan. I love how he looks. I love his character, and I think it's so brilliant. Like, number one, you see how incredibly powerful he is. And what's crazy is it's been written about and discussed over the years that all the characters in Watchmen are knockoffs of other characters, because you can't do this story with pre-established characters, because you're gonna kill some of them, and you're gonna dirty up some others. You can't do what you want to do in the story if it is Superman, Batman, The Question, etc., whatever. And so it's always been that, oh, Dr. Manhattan is their Superman. But I always give them a lot of credit that he has his own power set. He's not just Superman.
He's not flying around.
With a different outfit.
Shooting the beams out of his eyes, lifting cars up over his head, sort of thing. I mean, he sells the all-powerful, almighty bit super well, no pun intended. And it's unique. I mean, you don't see a lot that directly parallels the things that he does in this story.
Exactly. Yeah, like they give him a very unique power set, and even if you went in cold to this movie, you understand how he can pretty much manipulate all matter and all energy, and he sees the past, present, and future simultaneously, but only his own. So there is this like very godlike quality about him, and I find it fascinating that, again, it's right from the book. Credit where credit is due for Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons of when someone is that powerful and everything about them that is human gets stripped away or becomes less important, how then that would make them feel less and less connected to humanity. Mm-hmm. And I think that's just a fascinating idea to explore. And I think it is so perfectly encapsulated in, as I mentioned, Billy Crudup's performance and how the story is written here. And at a certain point, he even says to Laurie, you're my last connection to humanity. She was the last thing he cared about with humanity. And he'd rather be alone on Mars than be around people anymore. And it is somewhat cynical, but it's also fascinating, Right.
And, even though he's essentially all powerful and more or less all knowing within a certain grasp anyway, I love the moment where he brings her to Mars so that they can have their discussion and she can talk him into stopping this war before it happens. But when she first shows up, she can't breathe because he didn't consider the fact that she would not be able to function in that environment.
Right.
I mean, I don't know why. To me, that moment always just kind of stands out to me because it's like it just further shows his disconnect from humanity somehow.
Yeah, he doesn't even think, oh, that's right, you breathe. I forgot about breathing. Mm-hmm. No, it's so true.
But you're right, though. I mean, the way that they showcase his abilities and his functionality and everything is super strong and believable. I mean, as silly as that may sound, using that term with a character like that, believable, because this stands out to me. I remember years ago in high school, we all had jobs together at this car wash that was down the street from our school. And when things were slow, we'd sit around and talk. And me and this other guy were like heavily into comics. And then this other friend of ours, he didn't give a damn about comics. So he was always like screwing with us about it. So like we were talking, like the Deathstroke solo book had just started, Deathstroke the Terminator. And we were talking about this. He's like, what's this Deathstroke? That's a stupid sounding name. And we told him, this guy can use like 90% of his brain. He's like, that's complete bullshit. It's like, what do you mean it's bullshit? He's like, you'd be aware of your toenail like 24 hours a day with that kind of ability. I'm like, oh, yeah, I guess he's kind of right about that. So, it just, that kind of perspective, being able to make a character that has these unbelievable abilities and still be able to put it in a relatable sort of a context is really impressive writing. Be it credit to Moore or the script writers here or whomever or both. It just really solid in that case because like it or not, I mean, people always have the back and forth about, Superman being a hard character to write. I kind of see the perspective of people that say that, even though I don't think he's impossible. I do think that it would be more difficult to deal with that. And in a case of the character like Dr. Manhattan, I think they pulled it off brilliantly, that they showcased all of these things that he can do, but still made it where you had a grasp of really kind of where he's at, Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, and it's almost the, I don't want to say the dark side, but the flip side of Superman, where like, yes, Superman has the powers of a god, but his biggest weakness is he cares too much. He cares too much about everyone. And they're like, what if he had the powers of a god and it made him not care? And that's an interesting question, and that's what Dr. Manhattan is.
Sensible enough.
So, yeah, I think it's fascinating. And so another one of the big things about the movie that I guess we can get into is, and they set it up very early on, you meet Ozymandias, who, again, like in the script, it's written where it's like, oh, I'm trying to create free energy for the entire world because that would make the world a better place, which sounds really noble. But when he says it like he's plotting the destruction of the human race, it doesn't sound right. And so, but he's working with Dr. Manhattan, and they set it up from the very beginning that they're working on this energy together. You know, it's like, oh, we're trying to find a way to take the energy that Dr. Manhattan has and use it to create sustainable, renewable energy, which, you're like, oh yeah, okay, that makes sense. You know, if this guy's the smartest guy in the world and the richest guy in the world, and he's trying to make the world a better place, that sounds like a good plan. That sounds like a good place to start. And so they set that up early on. They check in on it multiple times throughout. You mentioned the scene between Laurie and Dr. Manhattan where they're having sex and he's still working in the other room, which is crazy, but kind of funny. I'll always remember the line, oh, like, it's like licking a battery because he's powerful. And so, like, they set that up very early on because Adrian's big diabolical plan is to create a common enemy for the world that will unite them and cause them to stop fighting with each other. And you know, I feel like that's an old adage, right? Is like the best way for peace is to have a common enemy, something to that effect. And that's his big evil plan. And so to use Dr. Manhattan, and I think they set it up beautifully throughout the film of how Dr. Manhattan changed the world. Everybody knows who he is. The only reason Russia hasn't destroyed us is because they're afraid of him. So everyone in the world knows who Dr. Manhattan is and knows his endless power. And so to use that reputation to then create the common enemy of Dr. Manhattan and manufacture this dramatic scene on live television that the world is watching where Dr. Manhattan loses his shit is a brilliant plan, because that's an enemy that the whole world goes, oh my God, if Dr. Manhattan ever turned on us, we'd be screwed. And that's essentially what Adrian creates, which is very different from the book. And I remember, and again, before I even read the book and the movie came out, the fans were like, what about the giant squid? And I was like, huh? What giant squid? What are you talking about? And then I read the book, and there's this very involved subplot of Adrian kidnapping the most brilliant scientist minds on Earth and putting them on an island and making them manufacture this giant monster that he then unleashes on the city, which is like same thing. That was the common enemy. He created this common enemy, and he made everyone believe it was an alien invasion and it was a giant squid. And so I remember the fans going, there was no squid. I'm pissed off. And I was like, where was there a squid? Where does a squid fit into this?
It's like the Goonies all over again.
I know. And then I read the book and I went, oh man, but there's a lot of exposition with all these kidnapped scientists to get to the squid. And I feel like the streamlining of using Dr. Manhattan as that common enemy, as that deterrent, knowing that the whole world is already afraid of Dr. Manhattan, was brilliant. I think it was a stroke of genius on how to not only streamline the story, but really make it all work together better, because now the threat isn't arbitrary.
You'd never get him to admit it, ever. But in my own mind, I'd like to think that Alan Moore watched this movie and went, son of a bitch, why didn't I think of that?
I mean, that's kind of how I feel. It just makes so much more thematic sense. And it's more self-contained. It's just more logical. I just like everything about it better. And so when we talk about there were improvements made, I mean, I said the other thing about like, oh, they don't start screwing when this is the biggest one. It was just a brilliant change in the story where it needed it the most. And I think, man, they pulled it off beautifully.
I got to be honest with you, and this is dead serious. When I read the book the first time, I thought, really? This giant tentacled thing, this is what the end of this ultimate book is supposed to be? And I honestly found it kind of silly. And I don't have really any real opposition to silly. I mean, I read comic books almost every day, and there's some silly stuff that goes on in comics, and I accept it, and I embrace it, and I love it. But somehow I just expected something more out of the end of that book. So when I watched the movie, I can't tell you how utterly delighted I was that this change was made. Because I've never cared for the way the book ended, honestly. And I know purists and more fans and what have you, they'll disagree with me until we're all blue in the face, but that's cool. You know, everybody likes what they like. And in my personal opinion, I agree with you. I think this is so much better than what we got in the book. So much better.
It's so smart. And yeah, like, I just felt like when I was reading the book, every time we'd go check in on the island with all the people, I was like, what does this have to do with anything? It just felt very detached from the rest of the story. And I think that the change that they made was a really brilliant one.
I skip over so much of that stuff. I mean, I've only read the book twice. Okay, so the first time I obviously read it cover to cover, read everything, and I was like, okay, pretty good. I like this. But there were some things that I just found unnecessary. Then, you know, I read it again a couple years later after having seen the movie several times, and I just basically read through the main story. Man, that book goes much quicker and much easier and much better when you cut off the Black Freighter stuff and the stuff with the doctors and all that other thing. It just
and that's what they did. That's what Zack Snyder did.
That's exactly right.
That's why I like the movie. Is like there was a lot of fat to trim. And for the purists who love the book, I'm sorry. I don't mean to be insulting your children, but like, yeah, for me, the Black Freighter stuff, it doesn't add enough value that it's worth it. You know, the very detailed novel excerpts that are in there are just so long, and there's so much of it. And then, yeah, the stuff with the scientists on the island, like, I just think they found all the right places to nip and tuck this thing.
By chance, are you reading Doomsday Clock?
No, because it like got delayed a bunch of months and then I lost track of it. So I need to like circle back around.
It's a 2-year project now because that's 12 issues and it's.
Yeah, I bought the first few and then like it was like, oh no, it's going to be a while, and then I forgot about it.
Well, I mean, I'm enjoying it. In fact, this last issue was fantastic. If you're a Dr. Manhattan fan, I would at this point just wait for the trade because I mean we're 4 to 6 months from this thing completely wrapping up anyway. But when that series started, Jeff Johns was doing kind of that same thing. Like the last 4 or 5 pages of the book, it seemed like were stuff like dossiers or excerpts from these other things, and it was just a lot of words. Like there wasn't a lot of artistry involved with it or anything like that. It's just much like the end of the chapters in Watchmen where they did that same thing. I mean, it had very much that same feel. And I was like, okay, I'm gonna read it, but you know, this kind of bogs me down a little bit. The last 2 or 3 issues of that book have been like 1 page at the end at most. So it's like Johns almost felt the tension that fans had over some of that and streamlined the hell out of it. And frankly, I think it's for the better.
Yeah. And don't get me wrong, like, I'm not saying I wanted everything streamlined, because again, I actually prefer the director's cut to the theatrical cut, because the director's cut has a lot more of that story in it. I remember the director's cut. I feel like the biggest thing that I always remember is that you go back to Hollis Mason, you see his death, you see Dan react to his death. Whereas in the theatrical cut, you meet him at the beginning, you see he and Dan together, you understand that he wrote a book, but you kind of leave it there. You don't revisit it at all. So I know that that's one of the biggest changes. And it's stuff like that where I'm like, oh, that still all is very important to the main story. So I do mourn that those things were cut from the theatrical, and I prefer them in the director's cut. But stuff like what we talked about, I wasn't sad to see it all go. So, yeah, I wanted to at least call that up because I thought that was a stroke of genius as far as adapting the graphic novel into a film.
I could not agree more.
I don't know why I just thought of this. I love Ozymandias's crazy cat pet. I love him. Oh,
Bubastis or whatever it's called.
I love that thing. And I love that in the movie there is like no explanation. He's just there. And it's just awesome. Like this really cool, unique, crazy cat creature that's there at the end. I love that.
I mean, if cats were more like that, I'd be much more excited about having 3 of them in my house. I'm just going to say that.
It's pretty awesome. And that was the other thing is, I guess we're kind of at the end, or we can jump back, don't worry. But if you get to that end where, Rorschach and Nite Owl, they learned about Adrian's evil plan to destroy most of the major cities, to put the fear of God, if you will, into the world so that they have to create peace. And so Nite Owl and Rorschach race off to... Are they on Antarctica? I think?
Antarctica, yeah.
Yeah. Go all the way up to the end of the earth to stop him. And they get in there.
It's technically down.
Oh, do they go down?
Yeah. Arctic north, Antarctic south.
Oh. Well, there you go. I didn't know that. Thank you. So they go down to it, and I love Veidt's evil lair in the Antarctic. And when
it's
they
like
go...
a castle. There's some water outside of it.
Yeah, I'll take one of those. We'll take that. So he goes in there, or they go in there, and they confront him. And I love this scene as well, like him fighting them off simultaneously, while at the same time explaining his evil plan, explaining what he's doing. And they say something to the effect of, well, you know we can't let you do this. And he was like, Do you think I'm a comic book supervillain? Do you think I would have told you this if there was a chance you could stop it? It's already done.
That was the best moment.
Oh, man. And that's like one of those, oh, holy crap. Like, that's not how this is supposed to go. But it's already done. That is like, I thought that was such a great twist on the standard James Bond or superhero tropes that you're used to, where the good guys get there just in time to stop it. And this happened while the good guys were on their way, and they don't even know it. Mm-hmm. That is, oh man, that's evil.
Sometimes the good guys don't win.
Well, there you have it.
Now, in this sequence, and again, I love the confrontation and the fight and the explanation and all that stuff going on. But when Silk Spectre shows up, and they mentioned the thing that Rorschach, I believe, said it at one point, that it's like, it said that he was so fast he could catch a bullet. Mm-hmm. So they established this. It's known, right?
Yeah.
So if he knows this, leads you to believe that the other people in the Watchmen group would probably know it as well, or at least be aware of this urban legend or what have you. So she shows up with Dr. Manhattan, and she pulls the gun. He's standing there looking at her. She shoots him. He goes down. This is the scene in this film that drives me guano loco every single time. Shoot him again. Don't even take the risk.
Yeah.
Double tap.
Yeah.
Shoot him again.
Right.
Or one of the other two that maybe is more aware of his capability, especially Rorschach, since he said it out loud at one point that he was that fast. Get on top of him while he's down on the ground and finish the job. Don't just assume that he's dead because you don't see a hole in him anywhere.
Right.
Come on, guys. You're better than this.
No, I get
it. It's nitpicky. I know it's nitpicky, but by God, it drives me crazy.
I get it. No, I know, because you're like, come on. Do you really think he's down? Better be sure.
They all seemed a little too complacent in the aftermath of that particular gunshot, but I know these things.
I know. No, I got your back on that one. And then John shows up, and boom, and I love that Ozymandias. God, Ozymandias.
Just call him Bite. That's what I do.
I love that he thinks he's ready for Dr. Manhattan. And he's like, boom, I got you. And then when Dr. Manhattan is like, oh, come on. The first thing I learned was how to reform myself, or whatever he says.
Put myself back together or something like that.
Yeah, and he's huge, and he comes in and he says, you're the world's smartest man. You pose no more threat to me than the world's smartest termite.
Great line.
Oh, such a good line. It's so good. And you think like, all right, the cavalry's here. At least Veidt won't get away with it. And when he lays it out and John is like, you have a point. Man, it's brutal. It's brutal, like where the end of it becomes this philosophical debate of like, Well, now if you expose him, those millions of people really did die for nothing. But now you've got peace, and all you have to do is keep your mouth shut, and we have peace. And it's like making a deal with the devil.
And, you know, they have the line where he's having the discussion with him, and I personally think that this is Veidt's best delivery in the entire film, where they said something about, you know, he says something about peace, and then I don't even remember who says it. I don't remember if it's Nite Owl or Rorschach that says it to him, peace based on a lie. And he just looks over and he says, but peace.
Yeah.
And he says it with such emotional authority as he says it. I just think that's beautiful. I just love that delivery. I mean, whether or not you can make the case or agree or anything else with this cold logic, I mean, clearly that cold logic appeals to Dr. Manhattan, but, you know, he's emotionally a little bit different than most of the rest of us, I think. But you do kind of see both ends of it here. You really do.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and that's why Dan and Lori, who are good people, they are heroic people. They want to do the right thing. Even they choose to stay silent because they realize, they're like, we can't stop it. It's already done. It's past. And now, if we do expose him, everything goes back to where it was. The world's at the brink of war again. And so they stay silent too, against their better judgment, but you understand why they would. Because they're in a really tough spot. And only Rorschach, to your point, only Rorschach is like, no, I don't care. I don't care. Never compromise. And so when he goes out and he's like, I'm out of here, and John, you know, beams himself out there, and Dan's watching. And it's so fitting. And again, in the book at this point, Dan's screwing Lori in the other room. But here, Dan, who is Rorschach's only friend, is there for his end, which I think is so emotional. And Rorschach knows he's not getting out of this. He knows. And so when he accepts his fate and screams at John, do it, oh man, like it's a great, powerful, tragic moment.
I fully agree. And the tragic, beautiful artistry of leaving like a Rorschach painting with the remains there.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. And then even Patrick Wilson like sells that reaction where it's like they've let everything kind of pass through their fingers, and he's like, he doesn't even know what to do with himself. This isn't the way this is supposed to go, which is the whole point of the book. It's the whole point of the movie. This isn't the way superhero stories are supposed to go. We were supposed to stop the bad guy, prevent Armageddon, and all go home. And everything took a bad turn.
You almost have to wonder if anybody watching the movie without having read the book or anything the first time, or even if you had read the book, because this ending is so different, whether or not John was going to be able to do some kind of a time manipulation thing to rewind these events from happening. But nope, they just kind of let it go the way it went.
Yeah. Well, he can't control time. He just can see it all. But I didn't even think of that. But yeah, I mean, like, again, when he showed up, you go, oh, all right, cavalry's here. And the fact that he's like, oh, no, you know, what does he say? Without condemning or condoning.
Yep.
Yeah.
He's trying to remain neutral about it. But again, it's that cold, calculated logic that he has in that moment. Because Veidt's got that. I think Veidt's heart's in the right place with this. I mean, I do. I hate to sound sympathetic with a guy that I think is kind of deranged, but I mean, I think his heart is in the right place, which we've talked numerous times about villains with proper motivation are certainly more interesting. You know, Zod's trying to do things for the benefit of his people and whatnot, just, you know, things like that. So you get it. And this is one of those movies where it's so hard to choose the side at the end. I mean, if I was in that circumstance, hand to God, I don't know what I would pick. I really don't. Mm-hmm. Because you see both ends of it so clearly. Who's right and who's wrong here?
Yeah. Well, and that's sort of the point. And Veidt even says that, they go, by killing millions, and he says to save billions. Mm-hmm. You know, it's like the acceptable sacrifice because the world is literally days away from ending if things keep going this way. It's almost like he's almost like the human race had their chance and they effed it up. So now it's up to me. And this is the only way to save the planet. And so, yeah, I think you're right. I think I don't know if you'd call them noble intentions, but he's trying to save the world. And
I certainly think his intentions are noble. It's maybe the acts that get him to this point that are absolutely questionable.
Right, but what he is willing to sacrifice to get there is obviously up for debate. Mm-hmm. And I distinctly remember, like, that was one thing I liked about this movie, and I continue to like about that movie, is it doesn't give you an easy answer. Because you do see all sides of it, and that was something that Zack Snyder said. I remember him saying that too, he's like, I like that it leaves on a note of you not knowing who was right or who to pick or what side to be on. He's like, I like the ambiguity of it, and I like that it leaves it up to you. And he's like, and I think the movie does that beautifully. So it is the fascinating question that's left by Watchmen. And even though we're talking about the end, there are two other things I wanted to call out because, you know, we jumped around a little bit. Another scene I don't think works in the movie is the sex scene in Archie. It's pretty cringy.
I could take or leave it.
The music choice is terrible. And then, yeah.
Not a Leonard Cohen fan? Or
no. And it doesn't work for me. That scene doesn't work for me. But the other thing is a smaller MVP in the film. Matt Frewer is Moloch.
Oh, he's so good in this.
I love him. Okay, number one, he's brilliant. And I have thought he's been brilliant forever. And he's been like a journeyman. He has showed up in so many things throughout his career, but I feel like he is so underappreciated. He is an amazingly talented guy. And so I love that he got this part in this movie. I think he's great as Moloch. I think you get even more of him in the director's cut, but the scene when he tells, number one, I feel so bad for him when Rorschach is like torturing him to get information. I'm like, oh, come on, leave the guy alone. But when he tells the story about the comedian breaking into his room in the middle of the night, like, that's a great scene too. Like how terrified he is. I think Jeffrey Dean Morgan, you know, we didn't touch too much on it, but he's amazing. Like, that's another just great actor. And I think it was a stroke of genius to make him the comedian. I think he's so good in it. And this was before he was, you know, he wasn't even as big a star then as he is now. But his performance of him saying something about like, here I am spilling my guts to you. You are my arch enemy, and you're the closest thing I have to a friend. I love that.
Yep. I'd tell you this was actually my favorite Matthew Frewer performance, but we're talking about The Stand for its 25th anniversary over on Dark Tower Radio this month, and Trash Can Man was freaking spectacular. So that's actually my favorite, but this ain't far behind it.
Yeah, he's so good and so tragic in this. And when he says, well, you know, the cancer that you get better from, this ain't it. Or, you know, something to that effect. This is
that ain't the kind I got.
That ain't the kind I got. Oh, man, like, that's heartbreaking. And he shows up at his arch enemy's funeral.
Mm-hmm.
Man. So I wanted to give a little shout out to him because it's a pretty small part, but he's great in it. And he's so memorable, and your heart breaks for him.
I agree.
And when Rorschach goes back to see him and he's dead, and that's when they set the trap for Rorschach. Oh my God, like, that's another great sequence of Rorschach freaking out of like, oh God, they got me. I'm so stupid. And like how he's just feverishly digging through the cabinets trying to find any way to get out of there. And he does pretty well, all things considered.
Yeah. If he hadn't... Honestly, if he hadn't jumped on top of that last cop that he took a swing at and started pounding on him, he probably had a chance of getting away there. But you don't always think clearly in gang fight situations, I guess.
I know. I mean, he did better than I would have done, is the point.
I mean, you'd have probably been like me and just curled up in a ball and been like, please don't hurt me.
Pretty much. But anyway, yeah. So I had forgotten about that sequence until we were talking. I was like, oh my god, yeah, that's a really good one too. So you still get your action beats. They're just not the way you expect them to. And oh my god, like when the riots start in the prison, and you kind of mentioned it earlier, the little guy who's waiting to like get through to get his revenge on Rorschach, and the way Rorschach takes out his two big guys, and he's like 2-0
and taunting him the entire time. By the way,
oh man, like that's some good stuff too. But oh my god, when they cut his arms off, that's where you're like, damn, this movie, man, it is brutal.
I'm still dying to know what he did to him in that bathroom.
Oh, right.
I mean, I appreciate the idea that your imagination presents much worse than the, what was probably actually done. But at the same time, I just want to know.
Yeah. In the jailbreak sequence, Silk Spectre punches out a guard. And the guard was Richard Citrone. You could see his face.
I did not realize that.
Yeah, so just another little Richard cameo there.
He's everywhere. He's freaking everywhere.
He is. Archie is super cool. I love that.
Looks and sounds both. I dig the engine sound effects on that thing. Yeah, a lot.
It's pretty badass. And I remember, I think it was Kevin Smith talking about that, being like, "Oh my god, when I saw Archie in that trailer, I was in love." And again, like that's somebody who like grew up reading Watchmen, and for me, I was just like, "Oh, cool ship, great," So yeah, I mean, there's so much cool stuff in this, and again, the flashbacks and everything as you get the parts and pieces. We didn't talk too much about the almost rape. Ooh, that one's tough to watch. I always have a hard every time that.
That's the common one that everybody will bring up when it comes to the comedian. For me, the scene in the bar after the Vietnam War is ended, and he has that little whatever you want to call it thing with the Vietnamese girl who's allegedly carrying his child. Oof.
Right.
And then doing what he did to her, and then John giving him crap about it, and then him saying, you could have turned the gun into whatever and stopped it from happening, but you didn't. So, I mean, at that point, he's already indicating that he's kind of losing his emotional touch, if you will, with humanity, I guess.
Well, right. Yeah, it's already begun. Yeah, that he's already losing his humanity.
And I guess at that point, it would make sense because, I mean, he came over there and started vaporizing people.
Right.
So, I mean, he would be a little bit detached to be able to do something like that without even flinching, basically. So.
Well, yeah, and there's the moment where he's like, yeah, Nixon asked me to intervene in Vietnam, and he's none of his predecessors would.
Right. And then, the thing that they're talking about in the narration in that moment where some of the Viet Cong specifically requested to surrender directly to him, and they're just kneeling down before him, like almost in worship fashion. I mean, that's crazy. Understandable, but crazy.
The Superman is real, and he's American.
Another great line in the film.
Yeah. So, real quick, this is Holy BatCast after all. Did you see the little Batman cameo?
No.
So during the opening credit sequence, one of those vignettes, I want to say it's like of one of the old superheroes punching a bad guy. On the wall behind him is the cover for Batman #1.
Huh.
But it's like a bunch of cover. Like it's all the covers. Like it's the same cover repeated like a dozen times on the wall behind him of Batman #1.
I'm going to have to watch it again now.
Which is pretty cool. Yeah. So look, we talked about Batman. We did our job. Go us.
Right on.
trying to think if there is anything else.
This is one of those movies. We're going to have to do this podcast again in a couple of years just to be able to talk about all of the stuff that we missed.
Well, there is certainly a lot.
I'll tell you what we should do, and maybe, I don't know, when we might get an actual gap where we have something where we're scratching our heads and wondering what to do. We should do like a commentary for the director's cut so that we made sure both got covered.
So we could do both. There you go.
Yeah.
Maybe when it turns 20.
That's a minute from now, so.
Oh, I'll be 50. I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to think about it. Dear God.
I'll be there before you. I'll let you know what it's like.
Yeah, please do. But yeah, there certainly is a lot. Another moment, like as things wrap up, we talked a lot about what happened in Antarctica, and they pretty much all of the Watchmen kind of let it stand, except for Rorschach, and he's not a problem anymore. And so we get that little...
Physically, he's not a problem anymore.
Well, this is true. He stacked the deck. And so, yeah, we do check in with Dan and Lori and Sally. And we're even there, they're like... It's like a... reluctant peace, it's like you can tell they're like, it worked, we're at peace, and they still don't feel quite good about it. And then they go back to they said, what does John always say? Nothing ever truly ends.
Mm-hmm.
So war may be over for now, but it will never truly end.
That's just the thing. I mean, that philosophically speaking, there's the one giant gaping hole with this whole thing is, yes, you've achieved peace, probably better than any other era in history prior to it, especially in the modern world. But at some point, somebody's going to step on someone else's toes, and this whole cycle is going to start over again.
Right.
What's the
for how
deterrent
long?
to keep that from happening this time? Is there some calculation there that you're going to have 50 years of peace, 20 years of peace? I mean, I understand the ultimate goal here, but the ultimate goal cannot necessarily be achieved. What's the next step? So that's, I don't know. It makes you think. It makes you think a lot.
Right. No, absolutely. Oh, and then the other moment that I would like to just call attention to is we mentioned the conversation between Dr. Manhattan and Lori on Mars, and where Dr. Manhattan sort of relearns the value of life because of Lori. Lori's a miracle because the man that Sally should have hated resulted in Lori. And against all odds, those two people who should have never come together did come together and created this one extra person. So kind of the magic of life and what can happen in the most unlikely circumstances, and how that reteaches John to appreciate the magic of life. And so even when he leaves at the end, he says, you taught me to the value of life, so maybe I'll try creating some. So one step closer to godhood, I guess.
That kind of leans into the whole doomsday clock process if you really want to get in depth about that. But
oh, interesting. But
depends.
yeah.
It just depends on how far down that rabbit hole you want to go with it. But that's kind of where my mind went watching it yesterday, because I was like, oh. Of course, Doomsday Clock was a little fresh in my mind because I just read that most recent issue, not yesterday, but the day before. So,
yeah. So, yeah, and then as you referred to already, Rorschach still gets the last laugh because he did what so many people in like TV and movies say they'll do, is they're like, hey, if anything happens to me, this is going to the press. Rorschach don't bluff. He never even threatened it. He just did it.
Yep.
He just dropped his journal off. And so, yeah, I mean, a really cool and for me unexpected like way to end the story. Or at least it was the first time I saw it. Now I know. But yeah, I love the moment prior to it where the newspaper, they're like, we got nothing to write about. The world's at peace. What do we do? And then Rorschach's about to F it all up, even after death.
But does anybody believe the crackpot conspiracy paper, though? More thought to be put into things.
I mean, was that a crackpot conspiracy paper?
I think so, wasn't it? I mean, it was
know.
just a small-time operation. It wasn't like the Daily Planet or something. So
Yeah, I don't know. I just assumed it was a newspaper. But yeah, Rorschach's journal.
So I
October
want
12th.
I want to get your perspective on something here.
Sure.
Rorschach refers to the mask never as the mask, but as his face. So clearly, it's the whole Bruce Wayne is the mask, Batman is who he really is sort of a thing with him, right?
Yeah.
So at the end, I mean, he can't stand to be without that friggin' mask. Like, it's driving him crazy when they peel it off of him. Give me back my face. When he gets out of the prison cell, the very first thing he does is go to the shrink's office and gets it back out of the box. I mean, that thing means the world to him, right? So in his final moments, when he knows he's faced with the situation that he's in with Dr. Manhattan there, he peels it off himself and, presents his human face there. Is that him accepting his mortality as a human being? I mean, what's your take on that? I'm just curious, because I don't really have one. I'm just curious what somebody else has to say about that.
I mean, yeah, I don't know if it's accepting his mortality, but I do think it's him accepting his fate. Rorschach is this powerful, uncompromising persona. It's who he sees himself as. And yeah, you would think that he might want to die that way, but I don't know. I mean, in a way, he's accepted that this is it, and so he's not Rorschach in that last moment.
Something I've been pondering for years about it, and I've never quite drawn my own conclusion to it, which is weird for me, because usually, even as abstract as some of Zack Snyder's stuff is, Sucker Punch or even some of the DC films that he's done, I've never quite been able to put my finger on the pulse of where I think it's at with this particular moment. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. I like having to think about it this much 10 years later, but I've just never drawn a real conclusion to it for myself.
Well, yeah, I mean, and I think that, like, Rorschach, when he's Rorschach, he's in a position of power, and he's not at that point. And at this point, like, everything is unraveled for everyone. And so, I don't know, I think it's, even if it wasn't a conscious decision, it still is somewhat fitting, because now he's at the mercy of what's happened around him and what John is about to do.
Mm-hmm. All right. I was just curious your thoughts.
Yeah, I'm just thinking out loud. Yeah. Anyway, Watchmen. 2 hours and 41 minutes of goodness, or even more if you've got one of the extended cuts. So why don't we give some closing thoughts on Watchmen 10 years later, Jamie?
I think it's a great film. I think it's getting better with age. I mean, it's like a fine wine to me. I think the more I watch it, the older I get, the more I have appreciation for the subtle elements and the overall grand scheme of it. I think it's a great movie. I thoroughly enjoy it. Is it the greatest movie ever made or anything? No, probably not. But again, for a movie to be viewed this many times over this period of time and even going forward from here, to still be thinking about it, still be processing, mulling it over, I mean, that's depth. And I don't know a lot of movies. I mean, sure, there's some out there. I mean, there's certainly plenty out there, but there's not a great deal of those versus like mindless popcorn type entertainment, especially in the comic book genre, for heaven's sake, that really make you turn your gears thinking about that sort of thing. So for that reason alone, I love it, but I also find it entertaining. I think the character moments are fantastic, almost across the board here. The cast is excellent. The music choices are really good. I even like the Leonard Cohen song, even if you don't. So we'll agree to disagree there. No, I really don't have a lot to complain about, other than a couple of the nitpicks that I threw out here. I mean, you raised some valid points about Veidt kind of being the only obvious choice in that matter. I mean, that's a perspective I'd never really taken, but it's certainly valid, and I think you're onto something with it. it doesn't really bother me a great deal. I mean, as far as bothersome stuff, it's just that damn gunshot thing that drives me crazy with that. But that's just getting hung up on a small detail. But no, I think it's a wonderful film. And I think if you haven't seen it for a very long time, I'd give it another go round and see what you think of it now.
Awesome. I mean, and I agree. It is a great movie. Again, it's not a perfect movie, but it's still a great movie. You can be both. And it's such a great celebration of the source material. I think that, a lot of the tweaks they made to the source material were for the better. I think that it is packed with story, with detail, with character, and it's a lot to digest. And that's what I love about it. Is I love that there's things that you can pick out on every viewing, or when it's over, it leaves you thinking. I always love movies that do that. When I walk out, instead of being like, oh, that was fun, that was a movie, I'm like, oh man, like, God, what about this? Like, well, yeah, like as you said, what would I do in that situation? What the heck? Like, I'd like to think that I would be this guy, but I might not be. Like it gives you a lot to chew on. It gives you a lot to digest and think about and discuss. And I think that that's all for the best. It's visually stunning. It's like Rorschach. It's uncompromising in its vision, which is something I've always liked about Zack Snyder as a filmmaker. Is he makes the films he sets out to make, and you either like them or you don't. And I think this is very much along those same lines. He wanted to make Watchmen, and he did it. And I think that he does it with flying colors, but I also understand watching the movie, it's not going to be for everybody. I think that, as you said, it only gets better with age. It's only gotten better with repeated viewings. And I've heard a lot of fans say this, and I have to agree that it was ahead of its time. It is the ultimate deconstruction of the superhero genre. Watchmen, when it was written in graphic novel form, was a deconstruction of comic books, of whatever at that point, what it would have been, like 50 years of superhero comics ish,
thereabouts.
And yeah, something like that neighborhood. Watchmen, the movie, is still very much a deconstruction of the superhero genre, superhero story tropes, and then in effect superhero movies. And so even though in 2009 there had been plenty of superhero movies, it still might have been a little early for something as deconstructive as this, because superheroes did not monopolize pop culture the way they do now 10 years later. There had certainly been plenty of them, and I distinctly remember when we saw the first pictures from Watchmen, I remember people went, wait, Ozymandias has nipples? And Zack Snyder said, yeah, of course he does. That's a big part, that was a big part of a superhero movie 10 years ago, and I'm doing an odd do it. And I was like, hell yeah, call it out. So he was deconstructing superhero movies circa 2009, and now that we've gotten countless more over the past 10 years, I think the movie works even better as a deconstruction of those tropes. Again, like that, the moment when you realize that, oh shit, they didn't stop anything because it already happened, like that still has that shock value because you're so used to seeing the formula. And this turns it on its ear, and it does that in many ways. It does it with the stories from the past and the stories with the present and the way the characters interact. And what we see is a very glamorous and fun and aspirational thing. Oh, wouldn't it be so fun to be a superhero? Oh my God, it would be so cool. This is like, yeah, but there would be compromises. The government would get involved. The government would outlaw you. All of a sudden, you would become a criminal. Like there's all these other things that the story introduces, and then the movie's not afraid to explore as well. So I think that, the more superhero content you get, the more you appreciate Watchmen and how it turns all of that on its ear. I think it's a fascinating movie. It's an entertaining movie. It's a thoughtful movie, and it's a great movie. I got some of my nitpicks out of the way, but those nitpicks aren't enough for me to not love the movie. I just love how much it sets out to achieve and how successfully it achieves most of those things. So this is a great one. I love it. And 10 years later, it does make me happy to see that it generally has a very positive reputation from the fan community. I love that people appreciate it for what it is, because it's really great.
Hear, hear.
Yeah. So Watchmen, 10 years. kudos to Zack Snyder for doing what many called impossible, because I didn't go into great detail, but look it up. Like, so many different filmmakers over the years tried to adapt this and nobody could crack it. And this cocky kid comes off of 300 and just boom, makes this movie, and it's awesome. So huge kudos to him, and then overall the entire cast and crew, and just a lot of great stuff here. So here's the good news, Jamie. I cleared out the Wayne Manor mailbox with Brendan like a day or two ago when we recorded. So I only have one email, and it's about Watchmen. So I'm going to read that. I'm not even going to do the Wayne Manor mailbox intro because it's literally just one Watchmen email, but I figure we can read that, and then the Wayne Manor mailbox truly is empty. So real quick, this is from Mark Bickford, and because we teased Watchmen, he knew this was coming. So here's what he said. Hey, Andy, Jamie, Brendan, and friends. First, I want to say that I loved your 200th episode. When I heard Rachel Kimsey and Richard Citrone participating, my jaw hit the floor. You did a great job, and I'm already looking forward to episode 400 with a special introduction by Stephen King. All right, we'll work on that. He said,
You catch that reference, right?
No.
Batman number 400 had a foreword by Stephen King.
Oh, did it?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. Great cover on that one, too.
Boo on me. Well, good for you for getting it, because I didn't get it. Anyway, he says, I'm really writing because you dropped the hint that you're going to be covering Watchmen. And since I'm even older than Jamie...
Oh, you are old.
He says, I'm not only older than dirt, but there's a chance that I was the guy who introduced dirt to rocks. I thought I'd contribute some of my memories of the movie discussion from the era when the book was new. I find it highly ironic that whenever discussion of the film comes up, there are posts by people criticizing Zack Snyder for using the book as storyboards, when back then, when Sam Hamm had written the initial script and Terry Gilliam was going to direct, think about that.
Oh, that would have been Guano Loco. Holy crap.
Fascinating. The letters columns in Amazing Heroes and Comics Buyer's Guide were filled with people saying, what's taking them so long? The book is its own storyboard. The only other thing that came up at the time, I remember Sam Hamm himself mentioning in an interview that the actual ending of the book doesn't work. When no more aliens showed up, the piece would fail. Of course, now DC has gone to the extent of basing an entire series, The Doomsday Clock, on the premise that the ending of Watchmen doesn't work. At the end of the day, I think that the Watchmen film Zack Snyder gave us after 20 plus years of false starts is magnificent. If anything, it came out too soon. The deconstructionism that it brings to the front of the book would probably be more ripe for audiences now as the MCU ends its initial saga. I also think that few, if any, of the people who criticize it for the number of times we see Dr. Manhattan's junk wouldn't be saying a single word if it was instead glowing blue naked Malin Ackerman. I'm eagerly looking forward to your thoughts. Best regards, Mark. Mark, thank you so much for the message. Great to hear from you. And interesting thoughts. And yeah, we kind of touched on some of that of like the people were like, oh, it's too faithful. Like, okay.
Again, somebody's going to have to explain to me what the hell that even means, because I don't get it.
But I mean, and that's a great point. I never really thought about that aspect of the giant squid ending. Is that like, oh, where are these aliens? Are they not coming? Okay, back to life as normal. Whereas in the movie, they specifically say, as long as people think that John is out there watching, we'll be okay. It's almost like it's like a very religious thing. Is, oh, as long as the big man up in the sky is watching me, I have to be good.
Well, that's just it. I mean, once again, just to circle back to what I said about how long that piece is going to last. Eventually, I mean, it's going to get to the point where like the next generation might even think that it was a myth to begin with, you know, kind of like the whole Dark Knight Rises thing or something along those lines. Like it just, eventually it's going to fade away from memory. And when that happens, that's when history generally repeats itself.
Yeah.
So,
and the sequel takes place like whatever, couple decades later. And in it, Al Pacino is going to be like, Dr. Manhattan is an absentee landlord.
That one's by me. I'm sorry.
Devil's Advocate.
Never saw it.
It's aight. Al Pacino is certainly having fun in it. Anyway, so yeah, no, it's very true. I think, yeah, like Dr. Manhattan, that ending buys them a little more time of peace, probably. But you're right, like with the aliens thing, probably wouldn't work. So thanks for those thoughts, Mark. It was great to hear from you, and that was really interesting. Anyway, look at that. 10 years later, Watchmen, Jamie, we did it. Congrats.
Yeah, it was a good time. I'm glad we got to discuss this after discussing it for, what, 3 years? 2 years,
Yeah.
3 years?
I mean, at least
This has been in the works for a minute.
Yeah, we've discussed it for a while, so I'm glad we finally made it happen. Super fun. Jamie, always a pleasure. If the folks at home want to keep up with you, where can they do so?
Social media outlets, Twitter, BatRaider3960, Real Fans Group on Facebook, various podcasts around there, you know, the usual.
All that stuff.
All
Cool.
of that jazz.
Sweet. You guys know where to find me. I told you at the beginning. Hopefully you were paying attention and you didn't fast forward. But if you did, I wouldn't blame you. I do that to podcasts I listen to. I'm not going to throw stones in this glass house. Anyway, that's it for this episode. Our 10-year look back at Zack Snyder's version of Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons' Watchmen. Even though, I forgot to mention this, Alan Moore is not credited because he's such a grouchy old SOB.
He's curmudgeonious.
Man. Oh, curmudgeon is putting it lightly. Anyway, so yeah, 10 years of that. Super fun looking back. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it as well. We do appreciate you. We appreciate you downloading the show. Thank you for joining us and for spending the past couple hours with us. Please do subscribe to the show so you never miss an episode. Please rate and review us on iTunes. And as Michael Keaton's Batman says, I want you to tell all your friends about me. I should warn you all that I'm recording this episode. I'm going to publish it right before I leave the country, but while I am out of the country, chances are that you will not get a new episode. So there might be a little bit of a gap there. Doesn't mean I don't love you. It just means that work has to come first because they pay my bills. So yeah, we might have a little gap in episodes while I'm gone, but as soon as I get back, I will do everything I can to get a new episode up and running for you fine folks. In the meantime, look at the back catalog. Revisit some old classics if you like. Go to holybatcast.com. You can go there. You can also find us all over social media on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. Just search for Holy BatCast. And if you've got a message for the Wayne Manor mailbox, you can send that to holybatcast@rf4rm.com. And you can always leave us a voicemail at 323-366-9246. But that'll do it for this episode. On behalf of Jamie, I've been Andy. This has been Holy BatCast. We will see you next time. Same bat time, same bat channel.
Holy BatCast is brought to you by Real Fans for Real Movies. Remember, the thoughts and opinions shared by the participants are theirs and theirs alone, and do not represent the companies or organizations they happen to work for.
I prefer the stillness here. I am tired of Earth. These people. I'm tired of being caught in the tangle of their lives. They claim their labors are to build a heaven, yet their heaven is populated with horrors. Perhaps the world is not made. Perhaps nothing is made. A clock without a craftsman. It's too late. Always has been. Always will be. Too late.